So let's talk brightly coloured battle hosts, lightning fast grav tanks, and towering wraith constructs, with an overview of the Aeldari in 10th edition Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Eldar, with an overview of their faction's army from the 10th edition index. So far it does seem that the Aeldari have been absolutely stomping most of Warhammer 40k flat since they came out. Loads of raw power both in their faction rules and certain incredibly powerful datasheet combos, and over the past couple of weeks have been running roughshod over a whole bunch of tournaments, and still seem to be winning and placing at a whole ton of events, even despite the nerfs that Games Workshop gave them, increasing some of their most powerful units' points cost by a bit. Looks like Eldar are perhaps here to stay as one of the game's top armies, at least until any sort of major balance update happens. So in this video I thought we'd talk through every rule and unit and see what's performing well on the tabletop. Index Aeldari is quite a big one as 40k armies go. Sticking with the trend from 9th edition, Aeldari basically still comprised of Harlequins now, perhaps having a little bit less identity of their own and a bit more merging with the faction in general. It does mean that there's really quite a lot of datasheets here now, particularly with the Ynnari and some of the Corsairs on top of that. In the index, Strands of Fate is the faction rule, the big and powerful fate dice mechanic where you get to roll a whole bunch of dice and substitute them in for key rolls. Their launch detachment is the Battle Host detachment. This one has Unparalleled Foresight as its special rule, re-rolling a hit and wound every single time everyone shoots and fights, giving you some massively powerful damage output on strong weapons. There's 6 stratagems, a lot of which focus around movement shenanigans, 4 enhancements for characters, a fairly whopping 60 datasheets, including the Harlequins and Ynnari as we mentioned, plus another 12 ones from Forge World as well from the Imperial Armor Index, which I will go over briefly at the end of the video. Putting that together, we've got the points with the Munitorum Field Handbook, and there are also just a few supporting rules for Harlequins and Ynnari, but no specific full detachments for those, which is kind of sad. I think it would have been pretty nice for Games Workshop to make a Harlequin and Ynnari detachment, given that they're armies with quite different identities, and it looks like they might not get full support like that until the Aeldari Codex comes out. Loads to talk about though, so let's jump straight in. First up, the army rule is Strands of Fate. This is reworked from the 9th edition rule, where it was a slightly complex table where you rolled dice and tried to get 6s for certain rolls. This one now has a sort of resemblance to Sisters of Battle Miracle dice, but instead of generating them through the game, for the most part you largely just throw 12 of them at the start of the game, and then that's your pool that's more or less set. There's no core way to generate more, but there are a fair few datasheets that can get you a few more or manipulate them. Guardians can allow you to spawn some if they're on objectives. Some others can get some more added to your pool for killing things, such as the Wraith Lord. Eldrad Ultron can allow you to start with another 3, and Farseers can manipulate them to get more 6s with them. The way it works is that you roll 12d6 at the start of the game, keep those dice face up, and they're the rolls that you can substitute in for certain rolls through the game, as per this table on the right. You can use them for advanced rolls, battle shock tests, charge rolls, damage rolls, hit rolls, saving throws, and wound rolls. If on that first roll of 12 you don't particularly like the result and you'd like to try and fish for something a little bit better, you're allowed to ditch one dice, re-roll the whole lot of them, and hopefully get a few less 1s and 2s. I think at the cost of 1 dice that could well be worth doing if you roll particularly poorly. In particular, any fate dice of a 6 are massively valuable for multiple different uses, perhaps particularly 6s to wound with devastating wounds or damage results. When you're swapping dice in for these preset results, you have to nominate that you're doing so before you make the roll. So say instead of rolling a dice to see whether or not your gun hits the target, say you're just going to substitute in a fate dice of a 3 for that, knowing that that's automatically going to be enough, and then that dice is spent and doesn't come back. Games Workshop, responding to Aeldari initially winning all the tournaments, has now capped that at just once per phase. Previously you could spend a whole ton of them straight out at the start of the game, so this will mean that you have to spend them a bit more slowly and use them in different phases and not just save them all up for say the shooting phase. It is still a very strong mechanic though. For roles that might have the biggest impacts to substitute them in, 6s to wound with devastating wound weapons is certainly one of the things that's made the biggest splash. Feed an auto 6 into say a Wraith Knight's heavy Wraith Cannon or a D Cannon support weapon, and that gives you a fairly scary amount of mortal wounds there. I was actually kind of surprised that Games Workshop didn't tone down that interaction, rather than just raising some points cost and limiting the mechanic in general. Otherwise, 6s could be kind of helpful to hit with really big guns in Overwatch. Again, things like those heavy Wraith Cannons, to get an auto hit with them is pretty huge. 4s or 5s could be handy for invulnerable saves, which a fair few of the army have, save you some big damage. Locking in long charges that you've got a chance of failing could be nice. 5s or 6s for big damage results are quite nice, and even advanced rolls and things could be pretty handy, say if you just need to absolutely get to an objective. Particularly with Farseers turning a bunch of dice into sixes over the course of the game, it is going to be a very impactful thing. Moving on from Strands of Fate, the Aeldari launch detachment is the battle host. This one gives you unparalleled foresight to allow you to re-roll one wound roll and one hit roll each time a unit is selected to either shoot or fight. It basically feels like old-style expert crafters or master artisans, and for those who have experienced those rules, it's really quite a powerful thing to have on anything with a small amount of high-power shots. Overall, this is just a very easy to use and a very nice rule to have. It's just going to amp up damage across your entire army all the time that you're fighting. For units that have just got one or two really big high power shots they're wounding on a 3+ with, it's often going to equate to an average of around about plus 50 to plus 80% damage output for that unit, which is kind of mad. Eldar weapons do have some fairly high damage characteristics as well, so making things like bright lances have a very high chance to convert the wound roll. That's going to add up to some seriously big damage quite quickly. It's a bit weaker on volume attacks, but still going to be useful. Overall, it's definitely a nice to have, maybe does incentivize certain units with big single high power shots. Units like Fire Prisms, Hornets, or Bright Lance Warwalkers like this quite a lot. Next up, the army's got 6 stratagems. For one command point, there's Feigned Retreats, a classic Eldar move of fall back, shoot and charge. It's definitely a nice one to be able to threaten. It means that Eldar units are hard to pin down, and locking them up in combat isn't going to guarantee to stop shooting for certain infantry units. A little bit on the niche side, but very, very powerful in the right situation. For 1 CP, there's Matchless Agility. This one gives you an auto advance of 6 inches. Maybe again a little bit more tame and a bit more niche, but sometimes you just absolutely need to guarantee that you make it onto an objective, or sometimes it'll be the difference between getting in range of assault weapons or not doing so. It's pretty nice with advance and charge as well. You could get that on Howling Banshees, or say with a Shadowseer and Harlequins. Next up, a pricey one is 2 command points for Fire and Fade. This one again is a standard Eldar move shoot move, very nice for moving around and then staying hidden, particularly as battle focus has largely gone away as a native rule for most units. In this version of the stratagem, it doesn't actually require you to fire a weapon or anything like that, and you can't embark in transports afterwards. It can be pretty handy if you've got a big shooting unit that needs to fire its damage and then get out of sight of enemies firing back, or you can just get a whole load of movement from it if it makes more sense. Getting a double move to get, say, a scary melee unit closer to the enemy could be kind of nice, or get them into cover and out of line of sight of enemy shooting. For 1 command point, Blade Storm isn't actually tied to any shuriken weapons anymore. You use this one in the shooting phase, and whenever your Eldari model gets a critical wound, you get to improve the AP of the attack by -2. This one's kind of like giving the old shuriken rule back, but basically to everything, including other high volume things like scatter lasers. Most of the shuriken weapons now don't do extra AP on 6s like they used to in 9th. I feel like it could be useful if you've got enough shots coming at the enemy, maybe a big unit of Wind Riders maybe. In general though, it's going to be a volume fire unit that needs to fire at a fairly tough target. I think unless you've got something with an absolutely excessive amount of shots, it's maybe going to be a bit lackluster compared with some of the others on offer. Next up, I feel like perhaps one of the very strongest one that the Eldar have access to is Phantasm, 1 CP for a 7-inch normal move at the end of the enemy movement phase. This one is just a massively powerful and enormously disruptive movement stratagem. Your opponent basically gets to set up their units exactly where you want them, and then you get to move one unit exactly where they don't. You could easily use this to keep one of your units safe from being charged, move them just 7 inches straight back where your opponent thinks they might have an easy charge for them. You could use it to keep units behind terrain and keep them out of line of sight when your opponent might have thought that they could shoot them, or you could potentially do other shenanigans with it, such as getting on an objective, charge blocking the enemy, or even just using it to get a scary unit of yours close to the enemy, say if you needed to hurry some Wraith Blades into combat. Overall, this one's absolutely massive, often going to be one that is used just about every turn I suspect. Finally, for 1 command point, we've got lightning fast reactions, a reactive -1 to hit that you can't use on Wraith constructs, but you can use on anything else. This one's a nice durability increase, but maybe better against things that are, say, ballistic skill or weapon skill 4+. Occasionally it will be worth it though, just to reduce enemy firepower, either save your unit from death, or just force them to expend more shots on that one thing so they can't move on to something else. Overall, I think it's a very, very strong stratagem section. Eldar are definitely going to be spoiled for choice with all this, and an Autarch could be quite tempting to just farm up command points all game long. I think that Phantasm is probably the best out of them for just 1 CP, but otherwise the vast majority of the rest of them are really quite usable. I'd probably rate Blade Storm as the single weakest. Next up, we've got the Enhancements, and the Eldar have 4 of them. First up, the Phoenix Gem is an enhancement that you can give to characters to make them a slight bit less likely to die. When the bearer is slain for the first time, you roll a 2+, and if you make it, then the bearer is set back up on the battlefield at the end of the phase if they're killed. I think that this one's very nice indeed. Might give the character a further turn to act if they're killed in combat, though it could be negated if the opponent manages to both shoot them and then fight them in combat after. I think at 25 points is maybe a bit on the steep side. You're sort of gambling on your character actually getting killed, and you won't actually get any value from it if they don't actually die. Next, we've got the Weeping Stones for 15 points. This one's another way to farm fate dice. Each time the bearer's unit destroys an enemy unit, roll 1d6 and add it to your fate dice pool, displaying the result you just rolled. Ideally, you'd want that on any character that's going to be killing a lot of enemies. Maybe it could be okay on something like a character leading a Wind Rider Jetbike squad and have them finish off light infantry with bursts of shuriken fire maybe. Or I have seen some people use them on Death Jesters, hoping their Shrieker cannons can put the finishing touch on one enemy unit. I think they're very usable for 15 points. Next, for 20 points, there's Reader of Runes. This one allows you to reroll one fate dice in your pool each of your command phases. I think that seems reasonable enough to try and improve some 1s or 2s and fish it for 5s or 6s. Definitely not a bad use of 20 extra points if you needed to try and round out a list, though at least some of the time you are just going to re-roll those low numbers back into more low numbers, and you can already improve a bunch of fate dice with Farseers over the course of the game anyway. Finally, for 15 points, there's Fate's Messenger. This one's an interesting one, I think genuinely quite good for 15 points again. Just after making a hit roll, wound roll, or saving throw for the model, you can treat the result as an unmodified 6 instead. This one's got a lot of potential on several different units, I think. You could get an automatic devastating wound for a Wraith Guard with a Spirit Seer in it. You can auto pass one save each enemy turn. It is per turn, not just per your turn. Or again, you might be able to use it on a Death Jester for an automatic 6 for sustained hits, as he gets 3 more with his Shrieker Cannon there. If you take your Death Jester, that seems very useful just for the firepower alone. Overall, I'd say that the enhancements here are generally quite good. I'd say the Phoenix Gem is maybe a little bit situational and dependent on your character actually dying, but the other three seem very good indeed. Fate's Messenger I think seems near enough auto-include for 15 points in a unit, that's solid extra damage and defense. Reader of Runes does give you more useful fate dice, which is great, and Weeping Stones gives you a chance to farm a few more. Any or all of those do seem like they could fit within an army. Overall, I think it's maybe not too much secret that the Eldar really have godly supporting rules. Both the fate dice and the big rule rolls for their detachment are useful enough just in themselves, but they also back that up with some pretty standout stratagems, particularly being able to move in the enemy turn, and then 3 very good enhancements as well, which is more than many armies have. Before we get on to datasheets, there's a few rules for allied Harlequins, Corsairs, and Ynnari. As I said, I think it would have been kind of fun if they'd actually given them their own detachments and things, but it looks like this is what they're getting until their codex comes out. For the Corsair units, like the Void Guard and Void Reavers, plus the Harlequin units, these are basically the rules for fielding them with Drukhari. You can basically take up to a quarter of your points in either Harlequins or Corsairs, or a mix of both. I guess in theory they would be slightly nerfed compared with running them in Aeldari, seeing as you wouldn't get the fate dice. If the Drukhari players do want any one character or any one unit out of those though, it does mean that they have the flexibility to pick them up. For the Ynnari, you are just allowed to throw in the Ynnari characters into your army, no questions asked. You can have a perfectly normal Eldar army and say just include the Incarn if you want, and it seems that plenty of people do. If you actually want to designate your force as Ynnari proper though, then the way that you do that is have your warlord as Ivrain, and she's the one who allows you to mix in Drukhari units to your army as well, even if they don't have the Aeldari faction keyword. Again, compared with running them in pure Drukhari, they won't get access to their pain tokens benefit, so arguably the actual Aeldari units are probably still going to be a little bit more powerful on average, but you would get a bunch of access to things to fill some interesting battlefield roles. Including either of these as allies means that you can't give them enhancements if they're not being taken outside of their main index, and as before, actually designating your force as proper Ynnari means that you can't take Phoenix Lords, the Avatar of Cain, the Solitaire or Homunculus Covens units, and weirdly you can't take Corsairs either, even though Ivrain has rules to join and lead them strangely. I feel like both of these could be interesting enough. Definitely a lot of scope for some pretty unusual combinations of units, with quite big selections of units that you can take from outside of the codex. I do think that the new index is maybe just a bit on the sad side for the Harlequins and the Ynnari though. They really just feel like sub-factions that need their own detachments to gain their flavour back, and unless Games Workshop surprises the Eldar with any sort of digital downloads for them, they're going to remain a very peripheral sort of force within the Eldar Codex until the actual Codex comes out. So anyway, enormously powerful supporting rules, but let's get on to the datasheets themselves for the Aeldari. For battle line units within the index, there's just the Guardian Defenders, Storm Guardians, and Corsair Void Reavers. It seems that the Rangers have been denied this now, and Dire Vengeance remain out of the theoretical troop section, and then you can add Harlequin troops to the battle line list if a troop master is your warlord, maybe as a bit of a nod to try and keep them a little bit more playable independently. So if you did want to spam them, then you could go fairly heavy. Does stop you taking something like an Autarch as your warlord though, who farms command points quite nicely. For datasheet changes for the faction, maybe not that much has changed. The Warlocks and the Skyrunners now have separated out datasheets depending on whether you take them as a single model or as a conclave. The single models do some minor buffs, the conclaves more are just guards for the Farseer with a little bit more durability. There's a new Autarch variant on the cards as well, a new Autarch Wayleaper, who is basically the one with the jump pack or the swooping hawk wings. He's got a separate datasheet to his on-foot version now. Crimson Hunter Exarchs basically are no longer a terror of the skies anymore. Previously they were their own datasheets, then got toned down to just be the standard Exarch upgrade, but quite a powerful one. Now they're just not really that much of a thing anymore, you just fill them as the standard Crimson Hunter. Otherwise, finally, for common datasheet rules, battle focus is basically gone as quite a big change for the faction. It no longer is just about every Eldar unit going to be move shoot moving around the board, but they can do a fair bit of it with some datasheet rules and also the stratagems. The Harlequins units have lost a whole ton of their special rules, things like flip belts and rising crescendo. We'll talk about them in their own section towards the end of the video. Aspect Warriors have broadly kept their 5+ invulnerable saves, making them a tiny bit more durable than they might have been in ages past. Eldari leadership is generally 6, so better than most for leadership things and not taking battle shock penalties, and there have been some general changes to the Wraith units as well. A lot of them hit on 4+ unless there's a Spirit Seer around, and they've generally lost their -1 damage rule for better toughness and armor saves. There is one notable Wraith Knight that bucks that trend though. In any case, let's jump into it properly though. We'll start out with a bunch of Eldar squads and then move on to Aspect Warriors and Phoenix Lords, and then roughly War Machines, Wraith units, characters, Harlequins, Ynnari, and Forge World stuff. First up, the Eldar are starting strong out of the gate. Guardian Defenders have 11 models for 110 points, just squads of 11 with the platform now. You can't take them in units up to 20. They've retained their 4+ save, so are at least somewhat durable as Eldar go, and their shuriken catapults, as with a fair few Eldar weapons, have retained the assault keyword, where most other things in the game tend to lose it. They'll be striking with a couple of shots at strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1, no longer getting the extra AP on 6s, but as small arms go in 10th edition that's still not too bad. These guys also showcase all the new profiles for the Eldari heavy weapons. The Bright Lance with its massive strength 12 and damage d6+2 is hugely threatening, great for the single rerolls. I'd say for most of the Aeldari units that's probably going to be the way that most people tend to go. Just having something that has that much anti-tank is hard to pass up, particularly in the context of their reroll things. I feel like maybe if they wanted it to be a bit more balanced, then perhaps putting it more like d6+1 like las cannons might have been sensible. Otherwise, you've got 2 plasma shots with the Star Cannon at strength 8 and damage 2, the Aeldari missile launcher for an anti-medium tank weapon, or a blast with sunburst at AP 1. The Shuriken Cannon is basically a heavy bolter profile at strength 6 with sustained hits, and the Scatter Laser remains spamming out anti-infantry damage, 6 attacks at strength 5, AP 0 and damage 1, good for chewing through hordes, but generally I think it is going to get outclassed by a lot of the things with a bit of AP. The Guardian Defenders farm Fate Dice on objectives, which makes them pretty excellent. I feel like you'd often want a unit of one of these to sit around on an objective with a home field Farseer. Very nice both to guard him and then make sure that you've got more powerful rerolls to plug into the rest of the army, and perhaps chip away with a few bright lance shots or small arms if the enemy gets close. Overall, I think they're a very strong unit. I can see a lot of lists taking one of these, maybe another one if they want to have some be adventurous and move up into the midfield. At the moment, I'd say that they thoroughly outclass the Storm Guardians, though. A very similar profile, although a tiny bit more expensive at 115 points. Instead of getting a massive anti-tank shot, they get a 5+ invulnerable save, so they will be a little bit tankier, but I still wouldn't say that they're so tough that it's actually notable, and the enemy won't mind just chewing through toughness 3 infantry. The melee attacks for the Storm Guardians are pretty awful on the basic troopers, just strength 3, AP 0 and damage 1 and only 2 attacks of them, very underwhelming compared with shuriken catapults. Admittedly, you do get a fair few special weapons in the squad though, 2 fusion guns and 2 flamers, plus 2 power swords to help out in melee. Though between the lot of them you basically get a unit that doesn't really know quite what it wants to do, whether that's shoot infantry or tanks at close range, or engage in combat when most of the units aren't really all that strong. Their special rule is to get sticky objectives, so if they take an objective and then move on, it'll still be yours, or if they get shot dead or fail battle shock or something. Definitely not nothing, and they are a little bit more survivable than some Eldar, but I'd still say that they're probably one of the more underwhelming units in the Codex, particularly when compared to the Defenders. Next up, we've got the Rangers with a unit of 5 to 10 models with 55 points or 110 points for 10 of them. I think that's really quite cheap for the sniper profile that they get. They get to fire with their Ranger long rifles at strength 4, AP 1 and damage 2. I think that's really not too bad a stat line for models that cost this cheap. They still hit on 3 pluses even on the move. They've got stealth to keep them a little bit safer, though they're still going to be pretty fragile if the opponent can see them, and infiltrators to potentially have them set up on the mid board if you want to, maybe screen out the enemy. They could be an interesting unit for some sniper fire with plunging fire as well if you put them in a bit more ruin. They've gained a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks, so again another small barrier to damage there, but still isn't really going to help them out against a whole bunch of small arms shooting them. And finally, their special rule is that if the enemy unit mends and move nearby them, they get to move d6 inches afterwards, maybe keeping them safe from shooting, or perhaps stopping them getting charged if you get lucky. Overall, for the pretty cheap points cost of just 11 points, I think that these guys are really quite strong right now. Having cheap units that start in the mid-board and screen things out is probably enough value just by itself, and in the right matchup with some key characters they can actually kill, you could play a bit more cagey with them and actually have them try and gun them down. I think they're particularly interesting with Irilith, meaning that they can't be shot greater than 12 inches away as well. I feel like they definitely have some play with him. Next up, we've got the Corsair Void Reavers, the other battle line unit besides the Guardians. 5 or 10 models of these, and either 70 or 140 points. These guys do cost quite a lot more than Guardians, at least on a per model basis. They scout 7 inches into the mid-board, have objective control 2, so are a little bit more threat to objectives, but they're still quite easy to kill for that cost. And most of them have shuriken rifles, basically rapid-fire versions of the shuriken catapult, or they can trade out for power swords. Besides that, the Felarch gets a 4+ invulnerable save, you've got a Shredder versus a Blaster for a special weapon, and if you have 10 models in the units, you can either take a Wraith Cannon or a Shuriken Cannon, probably the Wraith Cannon being the better one with the rerolls. They get to reroll hit rolls of 1 with a damage output, or all hit rolls against enemies on objectives, so perhaps a little bit better at scrapping over those. I think adding everything up though, I feel like they're probably not going to be one of the most popular choices out of the Aeldari. They just seem a little bit mixed in terms of what they want to try and achieve, and they do seem very, very pricey for a unit that's likely to be taking at least some fire and only has a toughness 3 and a 4+ save. I feel like you're investing this much in a unit, you might as well make them properly dangerous on the offensive and just take some aspect warriors. Otherwise, their more elite cousins are the Corsair Void Guard. These ones have a similar sort of stat line, but only objective control 1, though they do get an extra attack in combat. They're 90 points for 5 of them, or 180 points for 10. I feel like if you are taking these, you probably may as well take the 10 of them, as that's the one that actually unlocks you to be able to take the Shade Runner, Soul Weaver, and Wayseeker. They're specialists within the unit. You can't have those if you're just taking a 5 model squad. For their main advantages, they get to Mark 1 unit in the enemy army for lethal hits and precision all game long. I guess it means that you could try and use them as assassins against one character perhaps, and they get a couple of buffs to their damage, whether they're either equipped for shooting and melee, getting to ignore cover with a falchu, and the +1 attack compared with the Void Reavers with their power weapons as mentioned. Perhaps the biggest difference is that in 10 model squads you can also take a sniper rifle and or a fusion pistol. Not unhelpful, but not really the biggest change up from the standard troops type squad. The advantages that those 3 specialists bring is that it allows you to ignore 1 wound each turn, so that could at least save 1 model's life. The Psychic gets an Executioner Psychic attack with anti-infantry 2+, that's 3 shots with strength 6, AP 2 and damage D3, not a bad damage profile overall. And then the Assassin type 1 gets Hecatari Blades with twin linked melee, a whole bunch of attacks at strength 3, AP 2 and damage 1. Overall, I think realistically they're a little bit too expensive to be all that strong. 180 points for a unit that again really has lots of different things that it wants to do. Plus it's also just again really not all that tough for the points cost, even if it negates a wound. Still pretty fun though, an entire squad with fun weapons and upgrades. Next up, we've got the trusty Wind Riders. These can still be taken in very big squads, 3 to 9 models, either 80, 160 or 240 points. With that much volume fire, they could be a target for that Blade Storm stratagem for the extra AP2 on some scatter lasers or shuriken cannons or something. Their defensive profile I still think is okay for the points cost, 3+ save and toughness 4 considering how fast they are. And then now in 10th edition, as all weapon choices are free, you may as well take either the scatter laser or the shuriken cannon every time. I think that both of these just massively outcompete the Shuriken catapults now. Objective Control 2 isn't too bad for sweeping in and trying to take some objectives, and they also get some damage boosts if they manage to target an enemy unit that's on an objective, re-rolling hit rolls of 1 if they target the closest unit, and if the opponent's on an objective then you get to re-roll all hit rolls instead. Generally quite a fast, dangerous and efficient unit, seems like a strong choice for swooping in and clearing off the enemy troops off points. Shroud runners might give them a bit of competition though. 3 or 6 models for either 80 points or 160 points. They've got fewer character attachment options than the Wind Riders, but I still think bring a whole load of threat on their own right. A tougher defensive profile with 3 wounds and toughness 4. They get a scatter laser and they get the Ranger long rifle for a little bit of sniping. They've got stealth to help keep them a bit safer, scouts to move them up the board should they wish to early on, a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks, and finally they get 2 Mark 1 units within 12 inches for lethal hits. Quite a nice buffer if you're about to hit them with a whole bunch of volume fire, which I guess the Shroud Runners themselves are kind of capable of doing so. Overall, I feel like this points cost, they just seem like an all-round good value unit for moving around and hunting down enemy infantry. They do also have the chance to worry characters at least a little bit with those sniper rifles. I feel like perhaps a unit or two to do some scouting things into the midfield in the early game isn't too bad, particularly being one of the slightly more durable units as Eldar go. Next up though, we're into the Aspect Warriors. I thought we'd talk through each aspect and their Phoenix Lord in turn. I think it sort of makes sense to talk about them together, given that the Phoenix Lords are basically buffing units for each squad now. The boys in blue, the Dire Avengers, are either 70 points for 5 or 140 for 10. They still fight with their Avenger Shuriken catapults, basically getting an extra attack compared with the Guardian Defenders, and also having lethal hits as well. Aspect Warriors for the most part retain their 4+ or 3+ saves, the Dire Avengers having a 4+, and they all get their 5+ invulnerable saves as well, so are a little bit more hardy against high AP weapons than you might expect. They've got a fairly solid amount of volume fire that should chip at least some wounds off just about everything with those lethal hits, and they've got a very nice special rule called Defensive Tactics, giving them Overwatch on a 4+ provided they're on an objective marker. Really quite big for one command point when you could be firing off 30 shots with these, could effectively give them a second round of shooting before your opponent gets to target them. Definitely something to fear if your opponent moves something up to try and take the objective off you that's anything like infantry. Seem like decent enough objective skirmishers. If you want to take their Phoenix Lord around, then you can have Azaman in the unit as well. He's 120 points and can only join Dire Avengers, as with the rest of the Phoenix Lords and their aspects, they all give their unit +1 to hit. The general trend for the Phoenix Lords is that they have been toned down a bit in terms of personal power. They no longer have that big damage cap rule that makes them hard to kill in any one attack. They've all lost a wound and have lost toughness as well, so they are additionally easier to kill there. Azaman himself, though, is at least a little bit trickier to take down as he still has his 3+ invulnerable save though. Azaman pairs really quite nicely with the Dire Avengers as he gives them free Overwatch for 0 CP, and says that you can do so even if you've already used the stratagem on a different unit this phase. The intent of that one does seem kind of clear, might still need an errata though, so it actually overrides the Overwatch restriction of being used once per turn in general. That could be very brutal with a Dire Avenger squad, as we mentioned, plus he can also chip in with his own longer range Shuriken catapults, the Bloody Twins, 6 attacks at Strength 4, AP 1 and Damage 2. He's also got OK combat as well, with Strength 6 and Damage 3. Could be one place that you could use a Fate Dice in combat if you'd like, to punch through 3 automatic mortal wounds. Overall, I think he seems fairly usable for a massed up Dire Avenger unit. Moving on, we come to the Striking Scorpions, 5 or 10 models for either 75 or 150. These guys are infiltrators that can start in the midfield if you'd like to, so could get early charges on the opponent if you're feeling a bit brave. Compared with their 9th edition version, their base melee profile has been toned down really quite a lot. They've lost AP -1 and Strength 5, but they do still retain their sustained hits 1 that they basically had before, and they also have devastating wounds from the Mandiblasters against anything that isn't either a monster or a vehicle. For the Exarch's weapons, I think it's now a lot more balanced between the claw and the biting blade. I might be tempted by the claw even if it does hit on a 4+, not a 3. Overall, I'd say they seem usable for mid-board skirmishers, not really going to be doing very much against things that are particularly tough or not infantry though. The mortal wounds will help a bit, but a lot of their attacks might just bounce off thicker armour. Karandras though could definitely be an option to make them a lot more punchy. He's got his own fairly scary combat profile in the first place, Strength 8, AP 3 and Damage 2, or a sweep attack with Damage 1, and he both gives the Striking Scorpions a +1 to hit, and also if they made a charge move each turn, a hit roll of a 4+ also scores a critical hit, so should trigger those sustained rolls. Effectively for Scorpions on the charge he gives the rest of a unit around about a 60% damage buff, Never mind that also all works on him as well, and his own scary attacks. Just to make him a little bit more scary, his Scorpion's Bite gives him devastating wounds against anything that isn't Titanic. At 100 points, I think he's really quite an intimidating character. Definitely could turn a striking Scorpions unit into something that could handle most threats, as opposed to just light or medium infantry units. Next up, for the Howling Banshees, there may be a unit that perhaps isn't doing quite so well in the new codex compared with previously. 85 points for 5 of them, or 170 for 10. A little bit cheaper than 9th edition, though not loads. I do feel that they have lost a fair few special rules. They still strike with a flurry of strength 4 and damage 1 attacks with decent AP, but they have lost things like the +1 to wound on the charge, which is going to make them a lot less generalist, and they don't have the -1 to hit anymore, which was kind of handy for just making them a tiny bit less easy to kill. For positives though, they can still make long charges, they get to advance and charge if they want to, which you can lock in a 6 to the advance roll either with a fate dice or 1 CP. And at least in combat they're a tiny bit harder to kill, as they get a 4+ invulnerable save against melee attacks, kind of similar to Drukari Witches. The Exarch's still quite a big threat in her own right as well. The Executioner probably seems like the way to go there, with strength 5, AP -2 and damage 2, making the squad a bit better against medium or heavy infantry. Still just maybe seem a little bit fragile and not massively general purpose for a unit that's likely to be throwing itself towards the enemy. They definitely strike me as a unit that isn't going to like Overwatch much. Against combat at least they have the Fight's First special rule though, that is potentially powerful in 10th edition if your opponent really has to charge them and not just shoot them to death. It will give them the jump on the enemy, provided it's something that they can actually hurt. For their Phoenix Lord, we've got Jane Zar at 105 points. She's got quite generalist anti-elite melee with 6 attacks at strength 6 and damage 2, or a sweep attack at strength 4 and damage 1. Her Triskel, the Silent Death, has a whole bunch of attacks at strength 6 and AP 2 damage 1, so could kill a few more hordes there. And she gives the Banshees +1 to hit and heroic intervention for 0 CP. So if they wanted, they could potentially step up to support nearby Eldar units that got charged. Overall, I would say that she's probably not quite as standout as Karandras though, a lot more tailored to fighting infantry, and doesn't really cover the Banshee's weakness that much. Next up, we've got the Fire Dragons, 5 or 10 models for either 85 or 170 points. Quite a big drop compared with previously with their points cost, but also they do have kind of worse damage output, particularly wounding a lot of vehicles on 4s or 5s. Stats wise, they lost their toughness 4 down to toughness 3 once more, but they do still have their 3+ save armor for being a tiny bit more durable than some aspects. They still definitely feel like a unit that's likely to just run up to the enemy, shoot something, and then get hit back very hard, as the opponent wants to get rid of all of those scary melter guns. Their Dragon Fusion gun has seen a bit of a side grade compared with 9th. Strength 9 is a lot worse against any sort of heavy armor that you'd be wounding on a 5+. They no longer get the d6+2 damage just innately, you have to get within melter range for that, but that has been improved a bit should you manage to, and it goes up to Melter 3. The Exarch also either gets his Dragon's Breath Flamer or the Firebike built into his cost now. The Firepike still seems best really, as it just actually ties in with the unit's intended role. Strength 12, AP 4 and damage D6 Melter with 18-inch range, easily the best gun in the squad. They do get a buff against vehicles, getting to reroll wound rolls of 1 and damage rolls of 1 as well, which is quite nice on top of the Eldar rerolls that they already get. I think that roughly equates to around about a +30% damage output against vehicles. Overall, they don't seem terrible and are quite a big threat to any vehicles, particularly if they get within 6 inches of them, but I feel like they might perhaps be struggling for a bit of a role when you've got other units in the battle host. Those big rerolls are amazing with anti-tank weapons like Bright Lancers. Eldar really are quite efficient at gunning down enemy vehicles at range without having to risk fragile infantry getting very close to them. Fugan's 115 points if you want him to lead the Fire Dragons. He has swapped his toughness 5 for 5+ feel no pain, so still being a little bit more durable than most. His big melter is called Seer Song, 18 inches with a single shot at strength 14, AP -4 and damage d6, but a rather hilarious melter 6, which means that if you can get it within 9-inch range, it's going to go off like an absolute bomb in some vehicles, has a good chance of killing certain ones in a single round of shooting. It also does have an anti-elite type shot as well, with 3 shots at strength 8 and damage 2, making it a little bit more general purpose than some. His combat's fairly potent with the Fire Axe at strength 5, AP 4 and damage 3, perhaps a bit better than a couple of the Phoenix Lord attacks, and then like the rest of them he adds +1 to the hit roll for the Fire Dragons, and he's got Unquenchable Resolve. When he gets killed for the first time he stands back up on a 2+ at the end of the phase, with 4 wounds remaining. I feel like that special rule in particular is kind of relevant on him, seeing as he is quite likely to be throwing himself up the board with the Fire Dragons and trying to take down the enemy's big stuff. Overall, I think for his points cost is really not too bad. Quite a lot of things that you might want for a leader. I guess perhaps the main issue might be delivering him and the fire dragons into melter range, as outside of that they take a massive hit to their damage output. Maybe need something like a wave serpent perhaps. Moving on, next we've got the shadowy Dark Reapers. 5 or 10 models in the unit for either 75 or 150 points. Quite nice that these guys, when a lot of units have lost the amount of models that they can field in a squad, these guys have actually gained them. Games Workshop do seem to have chosen to make them into a lot less elite infantry though. Previously they were often 30 points per model or somewhere around that area. Now they're only 15 points per model, though it does seem that their damage output has been reduced quite a bit. If you want to buy some of these in for fire supports, their standard Reaper launchers ignore cover and also ignore any hit rolls or ballistic skill modifiers, and they are happy just walking around the board moving 6 inches and still hitting on a 3+, no questions asked. The big shot on the Reaper launcher is now strength 8 and damage 2, the small shot is 2 shots at strength 5, AP -1 and damage 2, so definitely a come down in damage output. For the points cut though, it's maybe not too bad, though they will struggle to punch up against tanks now, as strength 8 isn't really what it was. The Exarch does have significantly better damage output than the rest of his squad now with the Aeldari missile launcher, or he can take a Tempest launcher for a bit of ignores line of sight threat. I'm still maybe not too sure their damage output quite gets them where they need to be when they're quite a lot more fragile than a bunch of the vehicles and things that you could be dealing damage with, but definitely interesting to see them quite so cheap in 10th edition. If you want to take Morgan Ra to lead them into battle, he'll be 130 points, gives them the +1 to hit, which seems at least reasonable on an 150 point squad, and he chips in with the Morgan Tar Shuriken Cannon basically, with 6 shots at strength 7, AP1 and damage 2, and devastating wounds ignoring cover. He also has some combat, though I guess that normally you'd want to keep the Dark Reapers out of combat at just about all cost, and he himself gets a personal damage boost against anything that's below half strength, allowing you to reroll the hit roll and wound roll. Quite nice when you've got devastating wounds for him to execute the last of that squad. I feel like maybe he is a bit on the pricey side at 130 points and the most expensive Phoenix Lord. Kind of weird that he costs almost the same amount as the entire squad of Dark Reapers put together. Next we've got the fast moving Swooping Hawks, 5 or 10 models in this unit at 75 points or 150 for 10. They also went way down in points, but again got some big abilities taken away. The biggest change for them compared with 9th edition is that Skyleap no longer happens when they just move off the board after shooting. It now happens at the end of the opponent's turn, so they will get chance to shoot and attack them before they get to go away. I guess in theory that would have them try and land and deep strike somewhere where they can perhaps only see one target, just take it out with the las blasters, and then move away to deep strike somewhere new after your opponent's next turn. If you want a whole bunch of anti-horde shooting, these guys will still do that quite nicely, all of them getting 4 attacks at strength 4, AP 0 and damage 1 with the lethal hits, and the Exarch getting strength 5 on his shots with the Hawk Talon, though it is a bit sad that he lost the AP on that, as that was kind of handy. Seems okay if you want an anti-horde choice. They do put out a lot of damage against light infantry, better than most. I feel like they might have some at least fairly stiff competition from things like Wind Riders and Shroud Runners though, perhaps doing a similar sort of job but also being a little bit tougher. Baharoth is their Phoenix Lord, 125 points for them, and fairly similar stat line wise, both of his weapons losing just a little bit of AP, but still being an okay anti-elite threat, with a bunch of damage to attacks at range and in combat. He grants his squad +1 to hit, and perhaps more importantly gives them some move shoot move shenanigans back, meaning that you could pop out a swooping hawk unit and then shoot the enemy down, and then hide back behind cover again, potentially then sky leaping after should you wish to. Seems okay, but quite a lot to pay for the ability for 125 points perhaps. Still feels like quite an expensive unit that's to have to be played with at least fairly carefully, and could still be very susceptible to Overwatch. Next up we've got the Warp Spiders, a very strong unit for the Eldar at the moment, and lots seem to be making their way into competitive army lists. These guys are 100 points for 5 or 200 for 10. They come with a fairly fast movement with Fly, and the Death Spinner, which is now a torrent weapon, D6 auto hits at strength 4, AP 0 and damage 1, but with devastating wounds on 6s, meaning that you should be averaging at least a few mortals with all that monofilament when you're up close and personal. Perhaps the coolest thing about them though is their flicker jump special rule. Any movement phase, when the unit makes a normal move, you can instead make a flicker jump if you'd like. This gives them a 1 in 6 chance to take 1 mortal wound, which isn't really the biggest price to pay, and gets them a massive 24-inch movement to just jump up the board and get the jump on an enemy unit, or jump onto an objective, or do a tactical secondary. That frankly enormous and very unrestricted movement could seriously cause problems. If they're not just expending themselves to get you some victory points, then ideally I guess you want to pick on isolated enemy units, murder them with death spinners, and then hopefully remain safe from the enemy. Definitely a very spooky unit, and I can certainly see why a lot of competitive lists are using a unit or two. Finally, for the Aspect Warriors, we've got the Shining Spears. You get 3 to 6 models of them, 120 points or 240 for 6 of them. Fairly pricey at a big 40 points per bike now. They do have a couple of nice special rules to keep them a little bit safer. They basically have the Wind Rider defensive profile, but an extra wound on the Exarch. The squad gets a -1 to hit. You get a 5+ invulnerable save that can become a 4+ after either advancing or charging, and the Exarch gets a native 4+ as well anyway with his Mist Shield. These guys have lost a fair amount of hitting power though. Their laser lances in a previous life were AP -4 and higher strength than this. Now the laser lances in combat do have the lance keyword, but are only strength 4, AP 2 damage 2. Now far less threats to very big armoured targets with high armour saves than they were previously, and a bit worse against some tougher infantry and vehicles too. The Exarch still gets an improved version with his Star Lance, which I think is usually worth taking instead of the Paragon Sabre. It also gets you a bit of shooting as well as his Shuriken Cannon. I do feel like overall at the moment these guys are a little bit pricier compared with quite a few other things in the Aeldari Index. Overall, out of the Aspect Warriors and squads, I feel like there are a few standouts within all of that. Guardian Defenders for Fate dice and Farseer Guards seem good. Rangers are quite nice given that they're so cheap with some genuinely fairly good sniper damage, plus Infiltrate too. I think both Wind Riders and Shroud Runners are looking very efficient for Jetbike units, each in their own way. And out of the Aspect Warriors, I feel like perhaps some of the picks of them are the Dire Avengers, the Striking Scorpions, and maybe particularly the Warp Spiders. Perhaps Karandras being one of my favourite Phoenix Lords out of the choice of them. Moving on though, next up we have Eldar vehicles. First up the Vipers 75 points, a little bit on the pricey side for the damage and defense I think, only having a 3+ save, 6 wounds and toughness 6. As before it mounts the standard Eldar heavy weapons, on paper should be pretty great for the single reroll with the Bright Lance at least, and its special rule is Harassment Fire. Any shooting phase it gets to nominate one unit that it's hit. Until the end of the phase, the enemy unit can't have the benefit of cover on that unit. Really quite a big deal in 10th edition, where cover saves are very easy to come by indeed. I feel like for the cost of the Viper, it maybe doesn't compare enormously well to things like War Walkers or Hornets for the damage and defense, but maybe just 1 or 2 in an army to hand out some ignores cover, that could genuinely be quite good. Talking of which, next up we have the War Walkers, 95 points for these, and they're a fair bit harder to take out than the Viper point for point I think. They've got a 4+ invulnerable save, a really quite big -1 to wound at range, and a toughness of 7, so a little bit tougher than Vipers. Quite nice to have things like las cannons only wounding these on a 4+. They've got Scout 9 inches, which could be handy for getting some early lines of sight if you happen to go first, and they do mount 2 of the Aeldari heavy weapons, potentially a couple of Bright Lances to slog through enemy tanks with the big rerolls, and maybe could be kind of fun for a Fate dice of a 4 to save an enemy save when they do hit them with something very big and scary like an anti-tank weapon. Overall do seem pretty strong, some really quite good damage output and not too bad defense. Next up we've got the Falcon Grav Tank, 140 points for a mixed tank and transport with a transport capacity of 6, and unlike a fair few of the other Grav tanks it also has the Cloud Strike special rule, able to zoom down from the heavens should it want to. Unlike in 9th edition though, it no longer gets to Deep Strike turn 1 and then get out its contents to Alpha Strike the enemy with. It's a bit less functioning like an Aeldari drop pod with big guns now. Statline wise, it's toughness 9, 12 wounds and a 3+ save. That's the generic profile for Eldar Grav tanks. Not enormously durable for the cost on the whole, but they do tend to hit quite hard. Weapons wise, the pulsar laser gets 3 shots at strength 9, AP 2 and damage D6. A bit of a mid-strength weapon now it would seem. Okay against both infantry and vehicles, but maybe not stand out at either. Finally, for its special rule, if you did want to transport something like Fire Dragons, you can buff these quite hard with re-rolling wound rolls against the target, provided the Falcon has targeted them with some of its guns as well. Moving on, we've got the Fire Prism at 150 points. Games Workshop initially had these at 125, but it still seems they're very much being played at the higher price tag. They're still fast with a 14-inch move, even if they don't move quite as quickly as in 9th edition. For all of these Grav tanks as well, I would bear in mind that terrain is a lot more of an impediment to them than it was before. They need to move around terrain rather than going straight over most of the time. That mighty Prism Cannon is still absolutely murderous. It does have a disperse mode to deal with some enemy troops with damage 2 should it need to, but really the big values are out of the single shot version of it I think. 2 shots hitting at strength 18, AP 4 and a big damage of 6, and it gets a crystal targeting matrix that combines very well with the standard Aeldari rerolls, and that means that you get to reroll basically all the hit rolls and all the wound rolls for both of these really powerful shots. Then you can make the fire prisms just super hard to engage for the opponent. You get linked fire with them, which means that you get to measure line of sight from another friendly fire prism that you can see. That means that you could have 3 fire prisms spread out quite a bit, and potentially have almost nowhere to hide for a bunch of enemy units, or perhaps have 2 of them hidden in your own board quarter and only expose 1 of them to deal the firepower of 3 different fire prisms all in one, and then move it back to safety either with Fire and Fade or Phantasm. Overall, definitely a top tier Eldar unit, massive firepower, decent flexibility, and both easy to hide them and hard to hide from them. Next, we've got the Night Spinner for 170 points. Again, the same fairly standard Eldar tank chassis, the same as the Fire Prism and the Falcon. This one packs the Doom Weaver, the D6+3 blast shot, hitting at strength 7, AP 0 and damage 2, and getting devastating wounds and twin linked, so you are quite likely to get a fair few mortal wounds out of it. This is another one that Games Workshop put up in points cost a bit, going up from 140 to 170, maybe taking a bit of the shine off it, but still it is quite powerful to be able to threaten a whole bunch of mortal wounds on an enemy unit that's hiding out of line of sight. Could be really big for either fragile stuff that the enemy doesn't want you to hit, or things that are trying to take objectives. On top of that, it can also slow down a unit with its monofilament web special rule. That one's -2 to move, and the enemy can't advance as well. That could be very annoying on certain slow units trying to move their way up the board, say some big tanky Terminators. Overall still seems good, though it does pay a bit more of a premium for its barrage fire now. Next we've got the Eldar support weapons, 105 points now. Games Workshop again put these up. These get the choice of either the Shadow Weaver or the Vibro Cannon or the D Cannon, though I feel like they're really just paying the price tag for the D Cannon now, which is a bit stronger than the other two. Even at 105 points though, I think that the D Cannons are still very fearsome indeed. D3 shots with barrage hitting at strength 16, AP 4 and damage D6+2, getting heavy to counteract the barrage penalty if you stay still, and devastating wounds, meaning that it's basically the ideal target for a fate dice. D6+2 mortal wounds out of line of sight is absolutely a price worth paying a premium for. Quite nice to have them set up near to a Farseer, though they do have really quite solid damage output just in their own right. The stats are pretty immense, plus the battle host rerolls. The Shadow Weavers have a bunch more range, and I still think are kind of fine, but perhaps not as outstanding as the D cannons. The Vibro cannons seem very weak by comparison, and are definitely paying a bit of a tax for the other barrage weapons going up. Still seem like a very strong unit to have just hiding out of line of sight and punishing the enemy for advancing into the midfield with a bunch of mortal wounds. Moving on, next up we've got the Wave Serpent, 120 points and a transport capacity of 12, so can take say a Guardian squad plus an attached character. It's still a little bit tougher than the other grav tanks, with a 5+ invulnerable save and 13 wounds, plus it's a fair bit cheaper than most of them too. Its damage output maybe isn't quite as exciting as it could have been in the past though. All of the big exciting heavy weapons on its top gun got twin linked as its special rule, which is kind of unfortunate for them in the battle host attachment, as that kind of counteracts the wound roll that you could have got there. A little bit of value lost maybe, compared with if they'd had just 2 gun profiles. Still perhaps seems usable enough to deliver one important unit exactly where it needs to be, maybe getting some Dire Avengers out onto a midfield objective to be ready to lay down some Overwatch perhaps. Its special rule is being able to cast its Serpent Shield once per game, doing D3 mortal wounds to one enemy unit nearby, though it doesn't rob it of its invulnerable save. Moving on, let's talk through the Wraith units, the Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades, Wraith Lord and Wraith Knight. In the Wraith Guard squad there's 5 to 10 models at either 155 or 310 points for 10 of them. That is perhaps surprisingly cheap for such big tanky infantry. I have seen some people running entire squads of 10 alongside a Spirit Seer. The profile is really quite tough on a 7 and a 2+ save, which is quite nice with how easy it is to get cover. They are pretty durable marching up the board, even if they have lost their -1 damage from the previous edition. Their Wraith Cannons get a single shot, hitting on a 4+ normally at strength 14, AP 4 and damage D6. Really quite a scary shot and have devastating wounds as well, so you could use that to feed in a fate dice perhaps, or use that enhancement to get them an automatic 6 to wound each turn. The D size are a bit more close range, D6 shots at 12 inches without blast or anything like that. Fairly good against most targets, though no devastating wounds on these ones. Finally, their special rule is that once per battleground when an enemy unit targets this unit, after it's finished making its attacks, This unit gets to shoot as if it were your shooting phase. What's more, when it does get to attack back, all of its guns have the pistol ability as well, so it means that you could just blaze away at an enemy unit that fought you in combat with your Wraith cannons, potentially killing a bunch of enemies in their own turn. I think that reactive firepower rule in particular is very nice, and Spirit Seers I think make these into a lot more of a tempting choice with the +1 to hit and lethal hits as well. Seem like a good, durable, and really quite dangerous unit to have stomping up the board, potentially getting some devastating wounds off with Fate dice. For the Wraith Blades, they're a bit more expensive, 170 points for 5 of them, or 340 for 10, really quite a significant increase compared with the Wraith Guard. Their profile's been tweaked in the same sort of way as their shooting cousins, and I've got the choice between 3 Strength 7, AP 2 and Damage 2 attacks, or 5 attacks at Strength 6, AP 2 and Damage 1. I feel like out of those two, the Ghost Axe probably wins out of the two of them, just because it comes with the 4+ invulnerable save included as well, and it's usually going to be a little bit more efficient against anything that's got multi-wounds. The Wraith Guard special rule is a 4+ chance to fight on death, which is quite nice. I feel like overall out of the two though, probably the Wraith Guard are the winners out of these, costing a fair bit less, having some pretty brutal shooting, and that very powerful ability to strike back against the enemy when they get attacked. Next up, the Wraith Lord is 160 points, a fairly hefty price tag I think. Toughness 11, 10 wounds and a 2+ save, so at least fairly hard to kill. He can take 2 heavy weapons of your choice, could be double bright lances if you'd like, and he strikes in combat with a Ghost Glaive, which you may as well take as it's free now. Either 4 attacks at strength 10 and damage d6+1, or 8 attacks at strength 7, AP 2 and damage 2, a bit more of an anti-elite profile. I'd say perhaps compared with other Eldar choices, he may be a little bit on the underwhelming side now. He does get 2 very powerful anti-tank shots, and he's got some combat. The Ghost Glaive maybe isn't quite as general purpose as you might like though, wounding a lot of tougher vehicles on a 5+, when he would have been wounding most of the heavier stuff around on a 3 before. He does come with a nice special rule to generate Fate dice though. His Fated Hero means that if he slays an enemy unit, then he gets to roll a d6 and add it to your Fate dice pool. Maybe he's pointed just a little bit more for his stats because he's generating you some Fate dice along the way, provided he can actually find some units to finish off. Finally, for the Stompy Wraith construct units, we've got the dreaded Wraith Knight, 475 points, following a massive 105 point increase, though it still seems that people are running them pretty often in competitive Eldar lists. The Wraith Knight's pretty terrifying on its stats, toughness 12, a 2+ save and 18 wounds, and it's kept the -1 damage unlike the other Wraith units. He does match the Imperial Knights and things for objective control as well, having a big objective control 10. These things are very tough to kill, and it seems that most people tend to be taking the heavy Wraith cannon on them. Absolutely murderous damage against heavy targets, D3 shots at strength 20, AP -4 and 2d6 damage. It gets blast for a little bit more power against anything that's massed up heavy infantry, and also has devastating wounds on 6s, meaning that every time you roll a 6 with this thing you get 2d6 mortal wounds on your target. Of course you can just lock some of those in just by using Fate dice, either native 6s or ones that a Farseer generates, so one of these plus a Farseer is really quite a common pairing. The standard rerolls mean that you're quite likely to get at least 1 or 2 hits on your target, and then you can feed in an automatic 6 alongside any that you just roll normally, and then just hit the enemy with 2d6 mortal wounds that are really powerful against anything heavy, whether it's vehicles or anything, or even go through entire squads of smaller wound infantry. They're also hard to hide from as well, as they have the towering keyword, and can move around terrain and other vehicles a bit more nimbly than most, having an agile keyword that allows them to move over terrain that's less than 4 inches in height, and over non-titanic monsters and vehicles. It does have other weapon options that are fairly scary. I feel like they're not enormously well balanced against the Wraith cannons though. I feel like most of the time you probably want 2 of them, but I suppose you could trade one out for an invulnerable save if you wanted more defense. Being an absolutely ridiculously big unit as well that's not really locked out of most buffs, it does mean it's perhaps one of the best things that you can put on any focal buffs onto it, like say a Farseer's -1 to wound. That makes its defensive profile just even more terrifying. Overall still an enormously strong unit despite a massive points increase. Next up we've got the Eldar Flyers, and we're sticking with Wraith constructs for a second with the Hemlock Wraith Fighter. This one's 155 points now, so it's fairly cheap, though it is a flyer without the hover keyword, so it means that it's going to be starting off the board until coming in turn 2, and then blazing away with its heavy D scythes. Those are quite an interesting and generalist profile, 2d6 shots with blast in total, hitting on a 4+ at strength 12, AP 4 and damage 2, so should lend a good hand against both vehicles and squads. The ballistic skill 4+ maybe is a little bit unfortunate for it. It doesn't have the option of going to a 3+ with a Spirit Seer like some of the smaller Wraith units, and it means that you're probably likely averaging around about 3 or 4 hits at that profile, or less if you have a -1 to hit. On the defensive, it's toughness 8 and 12 wounds, a little bit less vulnerable to small arms, but it no longer has -1 damage or -1 to hit, so not quite as tough as it perhaps used to be. I feel like the fly rules have really ruined its Mind Shock pod as well, which has only got a 9-inch aura. You subtract 1 from the Battle Shock and Leadership tests for any units within that range, though if it comes out of reserve, that means that you won't be able to use that on turn 2 when it comes in, so that's not going to happen until turn 3 at earliest. Overall, compared with all the other scary Eldar gun platforms out there, I'm not sure this one's quite going to make the cut. I feel like at the least they probably could have increased the Bind Shock aura to be 12 inches, so it can actually affect some enemy units on the turn that it comes in. Out of the two, I'd perhaps say that the Crimson Hunter looks a little bit more interesting. This one comes with a pulse laser and usually a pair of bright lancers unless you fancy star cannons. Really quite a lot of scary anti-tank shooting when it comes out of reserve, and at least it can do its full amount of damage when it turns up, and will have a lot more choice of targets with a 36-inch range on the bright lancers as opposed to just the 18 inches of those heavy D-scythes. Compared with the Wraith Fighter, it also gets a 5+ invulnerable save and gets a rule called Sky Hunter, allowing you to get +1 to hit and wound against anything that can fly. That's going to make it a ton more efficient against a whole bunch of targets, particularly with that mid-strength pulse laser. With the Aeldari Battle Host rerolls, I feel like this thing is pretty dangerous and should be able to get that firepower to where it needs to be. It's still going to have a lot of competition for the firepower though, things like Fire Prisms or Eldar Hornets. Finally, before we get into Eldar characters, we've also got the Webway Gate as well. This one perhaps one of the most overcosted units in the index perhaps, 220 points for your set of 2 archers. Very tough with toughness 12 and 14 wounds, so it's going to be hard to kill, and has usual fortification rules of granting cover to things that are partially obscured by it, and rules that mean it doesn't really lock enemies in combat properly. This thing still has its trick that it had before of starting units in strategic reserve and then turning them up within a certain distance of the archers. Now it's wholly within 6 inches of the fortification in any direction, so it's maybe a little bit more flexible as to where things can arrive. When you can turn up from a strategic reserve there, you can also arrive within 9 inches of enemy models, which does mean that you can be quite powerful for suddenly making a counter-attack against enemies getting too close. But I feel like the entire rule is just a lot less relevant now it can't start in the midfield. I guess you'd probably be putting this up towards the front end of your deployment zone, and then having things drop somewhere towards a midfield objective, I guess. Overall, I think it's just not worth 220 points in any case. That's really quite a big price tag to pay for something that's going to deal absolutely no damage and can't move or claim objectives. I think it could be okay for the utility, but it would have to cost significantly less than this. Next up though, let's go on to Aeldari special characters. We'll start out with the Avatar, then talk Seers and Autarchs. The Avatar of Cain is 295 points. He's an epic hero, which means that you can't have more than one of him, and you can't give him any enhancements and things. That's a kind of a shame, as he would have quite liked a couple of them, and broadly speaking hasn't really changed too much in a big tanky combat machine that's pretty ideal for moving towards the mid-board objectives and dealing out some heavy damage in combat. Its defense really is quite massive still. 14 wounds at toughness 12 with a 2+ save, and keeping the rule where it halves damage. For the points cost, that does mean it's very tanky indeed, and you could potentially use Strands of Fate dice on 4s to pass those invulnerables against really big shots. Otherwise, the Wailing Doom still has its Melter Beam type shot, the beam rule being replaced by sustained hits D3, as they have been at quite a lot of other places in the game, and then some serious combat in melee, with 6 attacks at strength 14, AP 4 and damage D6+2, easy enough to tangle with the heaviest things around. His special rule is that he gets an aura of +1 to advance and charge for nearby Aeldari units. Maybe not too unhelpful for some things, but I feel like there's not all that much that really wants to run up alongside him. Maybe I guess a big unit of Wraith Blades perhaps. I feel like that rule is actually probably most useful just for him personally. Should give him a helpful boost towards getting all of that combat prowess actually into melee and get stuck into something important. Overall, I think he seems usable for that kind of points cost. Quite nice to have a unit that can reliably take some big hits and the opponent can't really afford to ignore. Moving on, we've got the Farseer, perhaps one of the best value units in the entire index, I think, at 65 points. Farseers can lead Guardian Defenders, Storm Guardians, or Warlock Conclaves. Perhaps the Guardian Defenders are perhaps one of the better options for that, sitting on points and farming fate dice, and chipping away with a bright lance shot while the Farseer does its buffing work. As we've mentioned a few times already, Farseers have a rule where if you use a fate dice roll for a unit within 12 inches, then once per turn you can treat one of your lower rolls as an automatic 6. So say if you had a D cannon or heavy wraith cannon in the shooting phase, you could feed in a 1 and make that into a 6, and get all of those automatic mortal wounds. It is per turn as well and not per battle round, and that could be quite helpful for say passing saves in the enemy turn, or potentially firing Overwatch with a very scary unit. Guaranteeing even just one heavy wraith cannon hit on an enemy model that's moving up in front of you could be enough to kill something important. I think that ability alone is worth an awful lot of points, but it also gets Fortune as well, a -1 to wound. That one triggers on a 2+ with no chance of perils or anything like that, and it can affect any unit within 12 inches, not just the Farseer's own units, and it's probably best on something that's going to be really tanky and taking a bunch of hits, maybe a Wraith Knight, a big block of Wraith Guard, or maybe even an Avatar of Cain. Anything with a high toughness value is going to be massively painful to put that on. Finally, as if those two weren't enough, you also get Eldritch Storm as well. Some okay, say anti-space marine shots with d6 shots, strength 6, AP 2 and damage d3. No hazardous on this one like some of the other races Psychers might have, and if you can see some elites over the next few turns, you'll probably be able to put out some pretty useful damage on them. Finally, the Farseer does chip in with a little bit of damage with its witch weapons, either a Singing Spear with an AP 0, strength 9 and damage 3 hit at range, or a Witchblade with just 2 attacks at damage 2 but gets anti-infantry at 2+ in combat. Both of those kind of fine really. Might be more tempted by the Singing Spear just for the extra range shot, as the Farseer still won't be that great in combat. Overall, just an enormously efficient unit for 65 points. Huge value out of all of the abilities, particularly the face dice farming and the -1 to wound, and its own personal Eldritch Storm damage is really not too bad either. The other generic option for the Farseer is the Farseer Skyrunner at 75 points. These can lead either the Warlock Skyrunner Conclave or the Wind Riders. Again, he's got that same branching fates rule to allow you to change one fate dice to a 6 each turn. You can only use that once per army per turn, even if you've got multiple Farseers, and I guess that does make them have slightly diminishing returns. Instead of Fortune for the -1 to wounds though, this guy gets Guide, so you get to select one friendly Aeldari unit within 12 inches, and each time the model makes an attack you get to re-roll the hit roll. I feel like this one's going to be more useful on really big units, particularly ones with a bunch of volume fire where the battle host rerolls aren't quite as big a factor. Full hit rerolls can certainly pair well with certain things that happen on exploding 6s, say for example a bunch of Dire Avengers with lethal hits, and reroll and fish for those lethals if you're trying to wound something that's very tough. The Jetbike Farseer again gets Eldritch Storm as well, plus has a little bit more shooting as it gets the twin Shuriken Catapult on the bikes as well, and can be a little bit faster for getting those powers where they need to be. Certainly another very strong unit, a bit more geared to aggression as opposed to defense this one though. Lastly, for the Farseers, we've also got Eldrad Ulthuan as well. He's 100 points, so is a little bit more than the other Farseers, and again he can lead either Guardian Defenders, Storm Guardians, or the Warlock Conclave. Games Workshop seem to want to make him a little bit more differentiated from the other Farseers. Rather than having the rule where he changes one dice to a 6 each time, he instead gets to just generate you 3d6 more fate dice at the start of the game, so you will have a few more options, hopefully some high numbers. Otherwise, besides that, he gets Doom, which triggers at the start of the shooting phase, and that's kind of useful as it does mean that he gets to either move or get out of a transport if need to before he gets to trigger that. That's the same as it was before, allowing you to +1 to the wound roll, and that does affect all Aeldari units in the army, so it does make one enemy unit just massively easy to kill. Finally, his special power instead of Eldritch Storm is Mind War, which I'd say might be a little bit less useful, just a single shot at strength 5, AP 2 and damage d6 with anti-character. Definitely has the potential to threaten to snipe characters out of units, but I think realistically you're going to be kind of lucky to do that. He could easily fail the wound roll, they could pass an invulnerable save, or he could just roll low on the damage. Overall, again, I do think he seems solid for the cost, +1 to wound and the extra fate dice are great value in themselves. I'd say in terms of sheer raw value though, is probably second place to the Farseers. I'd probably be wanting to add one of those in before you got to Eldrad. For Farseer support, we've also got a bunch of Warlocks as well. As mentioned, the Warlocks have had their datasheets separated out. You now either get the standard ones that are characters to attach to units, or the Conclave version that are more there to protect Farseers. The standard Warlock's 45 points, he can lead either Guardian Defenders or Storm Guardians, and you're allowed to attach a Warlock to the unit even if it's got another character already attached, like an Autarch or a Farseer. 45 points is quite cheap, and what you get for that is a Destructor Heavy Flamer type profile, d6 strength 5 auto hits up close, and then his psychic powers are either quicken or restrain, giving you an automatic 6-inch advance rather than making a roll, or restraining the enemy, meaning that if your opponent declares a charge, they get -2 to the charge roll when they're targeting your unit. I feel like those two are just kind of situational buffs really, probably not too much worth in buying a whole character in for them. I guess the advance move could be kind of helpful for getting towards midfield objectives super reliably in the early game. If you get there though, you've only got there with a whole bunch of Guardian bodies which really aren't the hardest to kill in the world, plus you've kind of made them more expensive for their defensive profile with a Warlock as well. Overall, I'm perhaps not super convinced on this guy. He is very cheap, but just doesn't really do a whole load. Otherwise, the Warlock Skyrunner is a little bit more at 55 points. he can only lead Wind Riders, and again he's got the option of attaching to the unit alongside say a Farseer or an Autarch Skyrunner. I'd say that his boosts are really quite a lot more helpful. You can either give your unit stealth for a -1 to hit, seems handy enough for a big massed up Wind Rider unit, or you can give ignores cover for the unit. That's really quite relevant with just mass shuriken or scatter laser shots that the opponent could be saving on pretty high numbers against. Overall, I think he's a bit more of a tempting upgrade to a Wind Rider squad, making him either tougher or more dangerous each turn as you need, and can chip in a little bit with his own damage profiles with some twin link shuriken catapults, a singing spear and destructor. That's at least a reasonable amount of close range anti-infantry fire there. Otherwise, for the Warlocks, there's the option to field them in conclaves. The standard Warlock conclave on foot is 2 to 4 models, either 60 points or 120. They all get 2 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save, and their special rule is to protect a Farseer. When a Farseer is leading the unit, each time an attack targets the unit, subtract 1 from the wound roll. I say that's not really unhelpful, but a whole load of things are going to be wounding them on either 3s or 2s to start with, so it's not like they're getting really that bad. They have a 4+ feel no pain against psychic attacks, which I guess is handy in a couple of matchups, and then otherwise they only really chip in with some mass destructor shooting and a bunch of singing spear or witchblade attacks. I think they'd perhaps be interesting just as a very cheap guard for a Farseer if you can't stretch to an entire Guardian squad. Seems like you're paying for a bit of a premium for them though. They just still don't really seem enormously tough or really add all that much to what the Farseer wants to do. Otherwise, there's the Warlock Skyrunner Conclave. These guys, you can either take 2 or 3 models on Jetbikes, either 100 points for the 2 or 150 for 3. A bit pricey for 50 points each maybe, given that they don't have the special rules of the lone one that can join Wind Riders. These guys are just basically the same deal, but for Jetseers. 3 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save and -1 to wound, maybe a little bit more relevant at toughness 4 perhaps, and each one individually, like the standard one, can chip in with a bunch of anti-infantry attacks, destructor shurikens plus singing spears. I still feel like they might be a bit of a hard sell compared with say their points in Wind Riders. You could have 6 Wind Riders with shuriken cannons to protect your Farseer if you wanted to spend 160 points on them. I feel like these guys maybe do have a few more advantages than the on-foot version though. Finally for the Seers, we've got the Wraith Leading Spirit Seer. Again, an excellent deal I think for 65 points. It can lead either Wraith Blaze, Wraith Guard, or the Wraith Lord. I guess if it joins the Wraith Lord, you make a bit of a weird 2-model unit. The Spirit Seer is just a 3-wound support Seer with a 4+ invulnerable save. It doesn't really do very much for its own personal stats, but the buffing rules for the Wraith units are kind of godly. Getting a +1 to hit and lethal hits for the unit is 2 massive damage buffs in one there. Really nice on a stacked up unit of Wraith Guard or Wraith Blades. All of those hitting on a 4+ was just a bit underwhelming. I feel like it might have been kind of tempting just for that, but he also gets to use the Tears of Isho, which allows him to basically revive 1 slain Wraith Guard or Wraith Blade each turn. Also pretty massive value when those models are equivalent of 13 points or more per man. Being really big tanky units as well, they've got a very good chance of being depleted but not destroyed outright, so there's a good chance that you would get to use that rule, never mind all the extra damage. You'd never be able to revive a Wraith Lord like this though, as if it gets destroyed then you just count as being your own character unit once more. It no longer counts as having a bodyguard. Overall it does seem pretty spectacular value between those two if you're building around a big unit of Wraith Guard or Wraith Blades. I've certainly seen a fair few people running a big stack of Wraith Guard with the Wraith Cannons. Looks like a very intimidating unit to have in the middle of the board, putting out some pretty efficient firepower with hitting on a 3+ and lethal hits, and also getting reactive attacks if they get shot themselves. Next up we've got the Autarchs, and now there's 3 different versions of these. The ones with the jump packs have been separated out compared with the standard one. The standard Autarch is still quite cheap at just 65 points. He can lead either Guardian Defenders or Storm Guardians, which I did think was kind of disappointing really, given that they're sort of like fancy aspect warriors that have travelled all the aspect paths. It just feels like they should be the choice that should have the option of joining the different aspect warrior squads as well, as opposed to just having to lead Guardians. Weapons wise, I think that for this one you'd probably want the Banshee Mask to give the unit fights first, the Starglaive for some actually quite good melee, and then your choice of gun in addition to that. Games Workshop still keeping a bit of differentiation between the 2 kits now, having the Fusion Pistol, Banshee Blade and Mandiblasters all tied together on one loadout, though I'd say that this is easily worse than the more flexible kit. It seems the main reason to include an Autarch in the army now is just literally for command point generation. He just generates 1 command point per turn if he's the Warlord, which I think just alone is well worth 65 points, never mind the fact that he's actually got some melee damage and shooting as well. He also has the ability to allow his own units to use a stratagem even if it's been used elsewhere in the army, which I think isn't terrible but maybe kind of niche use on Guardians. For the most part you're still better off just saving those command points to use on bigger more threatening units elsewhere, as opposed to ploughing them into the rank and file. Overall, I feel like at least one Autarch in the army is probably going to be worth it just literally for command point generation if nothing else, though a lot of people seem to prefer the Wayleaper. Talking of which, the Autarch Wayleaper is 80 points, and he represents both the version with the jump generator and the swooping hawk wings, both moving with a 14-inch move, fly, and the jump pack keyword. He gets deep strike and lone operative. He can't lead any units, so unfortunately you can't attach him to things like warp spiders or swooping hawks, but that does mean that he doesn't need a guardian escort or anything like that, and he can keep himself really quite safe, being an annoying unit to deal with in the late game potentially, moving around and trying to claim objectives, and he can't be shot outside of 12 inches. Otherwise, his weapon choices are really quite similar to the on foot version. Like I said, I'd probably go for the Banshee Mask, Starglaive, and your choice of one of the guns. And beyond his command point farming and his own combat abilities, he also gains an aura of +1 leadership as well. That could be handy enough to have in the heart of your battle line, just making sure that your squads don't succumb to battle shock quite as easily. It's not a massively huge advantage, but I think it's useful enough to have while he's also rustling up command points for those very powerful Eldar stratagems. I feel like perhaps the best way to use him would probably be to keep him safe for a few turns, and then jump forward and actually do some fighting or jump onto objectives and things toward the late game when most of his command point farming work is already done. Finally, for the Autarchs, there's the option for the Skyrunner, 80 points, and he can just lead Wind Riders. Again, very disappointing that he's not allowed to lead Shining Spears, as that really seems to be the unit that he naturally fit into with his Laser Lance and actually helping them out in combat a bit. As it is, it maybe just feels a little bit suboptimal to be in the Guardian Jetbike unit. They don't really want to be in combat much, where he kind of does with his Laser Lance. I suppose he could swap it out for a fusion gun, so he could actually chip in a little bit more with Wind Rider firepower, but I still feel the Laser Lance is probably the better shout out of the two, as he can be at least somewhat scary in combat, and make the unit a little bit more of a mixed threat. Otherwise though, kind of similar to the rest, command point generation, and his special rule is to allow you to automatically advance 6 inches for the Wind Riders, which I guess could be kind of relevant with assault weapons. I think in reality though, he just really wants to join Shining Spears, and unfortunately he is not able to. Still though, not too terrible stats for 80 points, particularly when he's farming command points all game long. I feel like it's very tempting to have an Autarch as your Warlord with the free command points, and then it's just which flavour of them you think is most useful. A lot of people seem to like the Wayleaper. Next up for the Corsairs, we've got Prince Iriel of Iandin, 100 points, and can lead either Void Reavers, Void Scarred, Guardian Defenders, or Storm Guardians. He's a 50-foot Autarch with 5 attacks at Strength 6, AP 3 and Damage 3 from his Spear of Twilight. Not too bad for tangling with Terminators or other enemy elites. He gives +1 objective control to his unit, which I think is okay, but maybe not super standout. Certainly the Guardians and the Corsairs already have a fair bit already. Perhaps his most useful special rule is his ability to redeploy 3 Aeldari units, which I guess could be kind of useful for some massive threats in the game. Say for example to try and get some better positioning with things like Fire Prisms or Wraith Knights or something, compared with an enemy gun line. It is a bit unfortunate that the redeploy comes before you know who's going first, so while it could be quite good for getting some slight positioning advantages, you can't go full on and just deploy massively aggressively if you know you've got first turn, or play super defensive if you know you're going second. I say it seems useful enough, though I think 100 points is a fairly steep price tag to pay for those abilities. Next up, we've got the Elatok Ranger character, Elite Nightspear. Worth noting that none of the Eldar special characters are locked to any given craft world now, so you can mix him in with Eldrad Ulthuan and Prince Iriel if desired. But I think that Ilic's really quite an interesting choice, 65 points and can lead Rangers, chips in with his own powerful sniper damage at Strength 6 and Damage 3, and also gives them 2 very nice buffs indeed, not being able to have them targeted outside of 12 inches by enemy ranged attacks, and also allowing the Rangers that he leads to re-roll the wound roll with their shooting. Both of those things are absolutely outstanding for a fairly fragile unit. Definitely turns them from being a minor threat to characters into something that they really can't afford to ignore that much, and also a unit that the opponent's going to have to position differently to try and deal with, rather than just spamming some bolter fire at them from longer range. He could also be an interesting choice as well for devastating wounds with that Voidbringer rifle. If you could bear to spend your precious 6 to hit in the shooting phase for some mortal wounds on an enemy character, that could be one way to near enough guarantee one dead, provided they've got 3 wounds or fewer left. Overall seems pretty strong and very usable. I feel like as armies go, the Eldar have done very well for their HQ choices. I feel like just about every army is probably going to want at least one Autarch and at least one Farseer for the Fate dice and the command point generation. Otherwise, I think both Eldrad and Elite Nightspear are both very usable, and units like the Warlock Skyrunner, Avatar of Cain, and even Prince Iriel are pretty justifiable, but maybe just a little bit further down the priority list. Moving on, we get into Harlequin territory, so let's talk about some deadly performing Eldar. The Harlequins have lost a fair bit of their identity coming into this codex. They don't have ways to customize their detachments or any unique stratagems or anything. I did find it a little bit sad that they've lost a bunch of their special rules. Their standard troops can no longer jump over enemy troops and terrain. They can't advance and charge anymore unless you've got a Shadow Seer in the unit. They've lost the ability to fall back and charge unless you use one of the stratagems, and they don't have -1 to hit in melee anymore. They just feel overall a lot more of a simple unit. They can hit at least fairly hard in melee, as they now get +1 to wound on the charge there, but maybe just not having quite as many Harlequin movement tricks as they had in the past. In the standard troop unit, you get between 5 and 12 models, at 15 points each basically. As they can have the option of building a troop master from the kit, you have the option to fill them in 5s, 6s, 11s or 12s. If you bring a troop master as your warlord, they get to become battle line, which does mean that you could still probably just about field an entire Harlequin army if you'd like to. Though I feel like if you are going within Greater Aeldari, it's kind of hard to pass up all the extra command points that having an Autarch as your warlord brings. Stats wise, they haven't really changed too much. They retain their 4+ invulnerable save, though only being objective control 1 is a little bit sad for a unit that's kind of a battle line unit for the sub-faction. Then weapons wise, they either have the option of the Harlequin's Blade with 5 attacks, or more likely just taking mass Harlequin special weapons, which are now just consolidated to a single profile, 4 attacks at strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1, with that +1 to wound on the charge. You can get 2 fusion pistols and 2 neuro disruptors, and then another set of 2 of each for 11 or 12 of the models. The fusion pistols are a little bit less dangerous, D3 damage with an extra melter 2 if you're in half range at just 3 inches, and the neuro disruptors are just anti-infantry 2+ now. They don't do mortal wound output. Overall, I think they're not terrible. They do have some decent supporting choices from either the Troop Master or the Shadow Seer as well, but certainly will struggle a fair bit against heavy hitters now. The fusion pistols will be wounding things on 5s, not 4s or better now, and they get far less damage if they do connect. The Skyweaver Jetbikes are now either 95 points for 2 or 190 for 4 of them. The fly changes have maybe hurt them a little bit with the terrain restrictions. They will have to go around a fair bit now and don't have quite as big a massive threat range. They get the choice of either the Shuriken Cannon profile or the new Haywire weapon profile with 2 shots at strength 3, AP 1 and damage 3, with anti-vehicle and devastating wounds for some big mortals there. I'd probably say that the Shuriken Cannon is a little bit more general purpose, unless you really think that you need to tailor to tanks in the meta. Otherwise, you've got the choice of either the Zephyr Glaive for 4 attacks at strength 5, AP 1 and damage 2 in combat, or the Star Bolus for an extra D3 shots at strength 7, AP 2 and damage 2 up close. Both of those pretty reasonable choices for killing some elite infantry, and I think they're quite well balanced. Finally, their special rule is Scything Swipes. If you move past an enemy unit, then he gets to deal a mortal wound on a 4+ for each jetbike in the squad. Realistically, I don't really think that that's very important, to be honest. Even with a squad of 4 of them, you're still only getting around about 2 mortal wounds on average. Not really super exciting there. I feel like for their points cost, they do feel a little bit on the underwhelming side now. The damage output's okay, but they won't be delivering it quite as wherever they want on the board as they were before, and they're not quite so hard to kill with things like the Mirage launchers going away. The Starweavers, the Harlequin Transport, 80 points with a transport capacity of 6. It still gets the 4+ invulnerable save, though it's a lot easier to kill as it no longer has the -1 to hit and turning off hit rerolls. Certainly can still deliver small units of Harlequins into battle though, getting them onto midfield objectives if they need to. Though again the fly changes will definitely impact this a little bit. The Starweaver special rule is quite a helpful transport shenanigan, which means that at the end of the fight phase, if there's no models currently embarked within the transport, you can select one friendly Harlequin infantry unit that's within 6 inches and re-embark it within it. A few quite interesting units of that. You could use it at the end of your own fight phase, after a unit's got out, charged and killed something, and then jumped back into the transport after to stay safe. Or you could do that at the end of the enemy turn if you're happy that you've secured that objective, and then get your squad back in the transport to gain some movement or go elsewhere. The Voidweaver's 100 points now, and has lost the ability to be taken in squadrons, so I guess you're taking max of 3 of them in the list now. Not being able to take 3 of them in a unit does definitely hurt things like using Fire and Fade on them, which was kind of an interesting tactic before. You could hit the enemy with some massive firepower, and then move a big scary unit out of line of sight once more. The stats are pretty similar to the Starweaver, though for some reason this one's Objective Control 2 rather than Objective Control 1. Not really too sure of the logic for that one. Out of the 2 big guns it has, I'd still say that the Prismatic Cannon is probably the way to go. Either 2 big anti-tank shots at strength 12, AP 3 and damage 4. Really quite nice with the battle host rerolls, or you can swap it out for a bunch of anti-horde shooting if that makes more sense. Its special rule is to give out a battle shock test after it's shot a unit. maybe a little bit limited potential in your own turn compared with the enemy. I suppose it could turn off some stratagems like defensive ones or interrupting in combat though. Overall not terrible for the damage output, but only 6 wounds even with a 4+ invulnerable save still seems really quite a fragile unit when you're paying 100 points for it. Otherwise for the Harlequins, we've got their characters. The Troop Master's 55 points, so it's really quite cheap now, though unfortunately he's nowhere near as hard hitting in combat. He strikes with his Troop Master's blade with 6 attacks at strength 4 and AP -2, but only damage 1. The special rule that he gives for the Harlequin troops though is quite a good one. He gives all their melee weapons devastating wounds while he's leading a unit, and with the amount of attacks a massed up Harlequin unit can throw out, that does mean that he does have quite a lot of chances to get some mortals. As well as that, he's also got an option to convert a fate dice to a 6 if he decides to use one for this model. I guess that could be interesting enough to use up some junk dice if your fartiers aren't getting through them fast enough. I guess could guarantee a single devastating wound in combat, or maybe be more useful for an automatic save, or guaranteeing a wound with a fusion pistol perhaps. I still think that they're going to be at least slightly low yield on him compared with just farming them into fartiers and putting them on other units though. If you're going for a full Harlequin army though, he is going to be the way to do so at the moment. If he's your warlord, the Harlequin troops get battle line, and that is kind of necessary if you want to fill out, say, a 2,000 point force of them. Next, for 70 points, we've got the Death Jester. He's now a lone operative and can't join any units, so he can't be hidden in a Harlequin troop, but should mean that he's hard for the opponent to catch up with. His Shrieker Cannon is basically a shuriken cannon with 24-inch range, strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2, and it gets devastating wounds rather than sustained hits. Then each time it fires, you either get to choose either ignores cover, precision, or sustained hits 3, all of which I think could be very useful against the right targets. Generally sustained hits 3 is probably the one to default to, unless you're targeting something quite specific though. It could be an interesting model to have that Fate's Messenger enhancement, that's just 15 points to make an auto 6 each turn, so I guess that could mean that you could guarantee 4 of those Shrieker Cannon shots landing, and probably another 2 as well. Otherwise, I suppose it could be helpful for his devastating wounds as well. Maybe take precision and guarantee some devastating wounds on a character that's supposedly hidden within a unit. In any case, lone operatives are just kind of handy to have around, can be quite annoying in the late game, and he also has the advantage of handing out a battle shock test if he manages to inflict any casualties on the unit. Maybe a tiny bit more niche use that, but helpful enough. The Shadowseer is the alternate choice to lead your Harlequin troops with, 60 points and basically rivaling the Troop Master for leading the troops into battle. The buff that the Shadowseer gives the unit is the stealth ability for a -1 to hit at range, and also Twilight Pathways to allow you to reroll advance rolls, and also advance and charge, so you can get some very fast Harlequin charges across the board. With a Shadowseer on the go, it means that you've got an average charge threat range of 19 inches with this. Seems kind of handy if you are having a big troop squad start on the board, maybe hide out of line of sight, and then surprise the enemy with a very long charge distance halfway towards their deployment zone. It can also help out in melee a little bit as well. The Mistave I think actually rivals the Troop Master quite well for damage output now. Actually having a damage characteristic that's above 1 is kind of nice. Seems like it's at least somewhat well balanced with the Troop Master. Either get devastating wounds for a lot more of a punchy Harlequin unit, or one that's a bit more likely to make combat between long charges and -1 to hit. Finally for the Harlequins, there's the very interesting little horror that is the Solitaire, 115 points, and basically what feels like a ridiculously fast-moving Eldar assassin. Enormous movement and then melee capabilities enough to take out entire squads of enemy units. His defensive profile's kind of weird, perhaps surprisingly easy to kill with just a flurry of small arms or something like that. He's only got 3 wounds and a 3+ invulnerable save, so he's going to be more resilient than you might expect to anti-tank weapons, but if targeted with a flurry of bolters or las weapons, he's going to go down quick. In general, his rules are set up so he's almost certainly going to get the jump on the enemy rather than the other way round though. His infantry with a 12-inch move, he can advance and charge, so that further increases his threat range there. Plus once a game he can still blitz as well, which gives him an absolutely ridiculous charge threat range. 2d6 movement on a normal move, meaning that he can't advance, but between that and charging as well, it means that he'll be able to charge something on average 26 inches away if you roll fairly normally. When he gets there after the blitz move as well, he also gets an extra 3 attacks, meaning that he'd have 12 attacks with strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2, or with precision as well. Could be enough to threaten entire squads of 2 wound Space Marines, or certainly enough to kill an unsuspecting character straight out of a unit. I guess ideally you probably want to move very fast, kill something outlying, and then hide so the opponent doesn't just kill him fairly trivially in return. If you can force the opponent to have to try and deal with him in combat as well, then that could be a problem for them, as he has fights first to get the jump on them if they get charged in against. Overall feels like a really interesting unit, definitely enough speed and power to be a really big threat on the board, but at the same time needs to be played with very carefully, otherwise he might just get killed pretty easily if the enemy has things that they can just step up and counter-attack with. Next up, we've got the 3 Ynnari characters. Yvraine is 100 points, and she's the one that unlocks the Ynnari detachment if you actually want to build around them. The same as the Troop Master though, it does mean giving up an Autarch as your Warlord, which is going to mean a whole load less command points. It does allow you to mix and match with Drukhari units though, which is kind of fun, though that seems to be the only major advantage, and you can include Yvraine or the Incarn or anything in a normal Eldar army without having to go full Ynnari or make her your Warlord. She's got pretty much the best choice of just about any character to lead, be it in the Corsair units, Guardian Defenders or Storm Guardians, and also Cabalite Warriors, Witches, or the Harlequin troop as well. Even though it's kind of weird that the Ynnari unique detachment, if she is your Warlord, blocks out the Corsairs from being taken at all. As for what she brings herself, she's got really quite a powerful attack that targets enemy infantry. Storm of Whispers, if it targets an enemy infantry unit, could be good for on average around about 4 mortal wounds, but it's going to be far less good against anything else that doesn't have the infantry keyword. Beyond that, she gives her unit a 5+ feel no pain, so a little bit more durability there, though I wouldn't say it gets any of these units to actually be a tough unit, plus Word of the Phoenix for a 2+ chance to resurrect D3 slain bodyguard units in your command phase. Finally, she also helps out in combat a little bit, with 5 attacks at strength 4, AP 3 and damage 2 in combat with devastating wounds, so it does chip in a bit there. I kind of feel like out of these options, she'd probably be best alongside a Harlequin troop with 4+ invulnerable saves. You might be getting towards an Eldar unit that is actually kind of hard to kill at that point, but at 100 points might be a little bit expensive compared with some of the other very good character options. The Vizarch is 90 points, he can lead any of the same choices as Yvraine as well, and he can join the same unit if Yvraine's there as well. He's got some champion style melee rules, his attacks have precision and a strength 5 AP 4 damage 2, then he gets to choose one of 3 different buffs depending on what he's fighting. Could have lethal hits against things that he's wounding on high numbers, or just sustained hits 2 for a bunch of extra attacks. Otherwise, from what he actually gives to the unit is that he makes them fight first. Could be very big in melee versus melee matchups. Again, like Yvraine, I feel like he's going to be most useful on a unit of Harlequins perhaps. You would be getting into a very pricey unit indeed though if you both had him, Yvraine and the Harlequin unit all in one, and even with Yvraine's toughness boost that's still going to get taken apart with some focused small arms fire. Finally, I'd say probably best out of the Ynnari models by quite a way is the Incarn, the avatar of the God of the Dead. Not quite as much raw might as the avatar of Cain, but perhaps giving a lot more tricks and shenanigans that you can do on the table. It is still fairly tanky with a big toughness 10, a 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable, and halving damage like the avatar of Cain. Not quite as hard to kill though, as it lacks toughness 12. It mainly brings a whole bunch of personal melee. The Swirling Soul Energy's got a lot more exciting in 10th edition. D6 plus 3 shots that auto hit at strength 7, AP 1 and damage D3. That's something that most units can't just ignore. And then a whole bunch of fairly general purpose combat, either strength 12 with big damage, or a sweep attack with strength 6 and damage 1. The Sword of Souls no longer ignores invulnerable saves anymore though. As before, perhaps the single best thing is the teleport trick that it can do. Inevitable death means that once per phase, if this model's on the battlefield, when another unit is destroyed, then just after removing the last model in that unit, you can then teleport this model to just where that unit was killed, provided it's not quite in engagement range of any enemy units. There's massive potential for shenanigans with that. The opponent could potentially charge and kill one of your units, and then the Incarn pops up to deal massive damage in your own turn, or your opponent could charge the Incarn with something, kill something somewhere else on the battlefield, and then have it disappear somewhere else. Definitely could be a very tricky unit to play against, ideally trying to stay safe while picking off isolated enemy units one by one. I'd certainly say it's probably the strongest datasheet for the points out of the Ynnari. Finally, for the Eldar, we get into their Forge World choices, and they do have really quite a lot of units and actually some very scary stuff here. First up, Shadow Spectres I think are quite a solid aspect, 80 points for a squad of 5 of them, or 160 for 10, plus 20 points if you want to take an Exarch as well, which can be taken in addition. He's basically just 1 extra wound and could be good for tanking damage 1 attacks. Their Prism Rifles are quite nice general purpose weapons I think for just 16 point models, either a single anti-elite shot at strength 6 and damage 3, or a dispersed blast with d6 strength 4 and AP 1 shots. The blast keyword on a whole bunch of models like this could add up to quite a bit against certain units with high unit counts. I think all of that's really quite solid for the points cost to start with, but they also have a whole bunch of other advantages. Stealth at range for a -1 to hit, a 3+ armor save, deep strike fly, and a fast movement to get the first strike on the enemy rather than the other way around. And perhaps most importantly of all, the ability to move and shoot with Shade of Twilight. This means that after you've fired with a unit, you can move 6 inches, so you could have these guys pop out of cover, shoot something, and then hide back behind again, or just gain more movement. Overall, these things do seem pretty standout good for just 16 points each. Another very strong Eldar unit indeed, I think. They also do have their Phoenix Lord Irilith as well. He's 105 points and adds +1 to hit for a Shadow Spectre's unit. He's also chipping in with his 3 attacks, 4 damage shooting, and can actually make them a bit of a combat threat as well, though I suspect that most of the time you'd usually just want to keep them out of melee. He's also got a Battle Shock and Leadership debuff rule, which is kind of so-so. I think for his generalist shooting, plus the ability to buff a big unit of Shadow Spectres, he could well be worth it at the points cost. Maybe a bit more tempting for a big 10-man squad than just a small one though. The Wraith Seer is 160 points, so the same as the Wraith Lord. These things perhaps used to be a little bit more fearsome, but now have been toned down a bit. He gets the same sort of stats with a 5+ invulnerable save, though arguably his melee is a little bit worse with that Ghost Spear. It seems a lot more geared to just killing hordes of infantry as opposed to dealing damage to heavy or elites. I guess it does have precision for a decent chance to snipe out some characters though, I suppose. Otherwise it doesn't really carry quite as big heavy firepower compared with the regular Wraith Lord. The Wraith Seer D-Cannon has been nerfed a fair bit compared with its previous incarnation. Just a single big shot at 24 inches now, no firing out of line of sight for this guy. I say a special rule is a bit weaker as well. In the shooting phase, after his shot, select a unit that's been hit by his attacks, and that unit must take a battle shock test. I'd say that overall between all this, the Wraith Lord is probably the one to go for between the two of them if you want one. More heavy weapons and a better special rule I think just outweigh this guy by a bit. Next up, the Eldar Hornet's often been a unit that's been kind of competitive for the Eldar. 80 points for a really quite cheap little Grav Skimmer tank, but packs some very heavy firepower. And I think for 80 points these things are absolutely standout at the moment. First up, they move very fast at 14 inches like most of the other Grav things, and his toughness I think is actually kind of okay for the cost at toughness 7 and 8 wounds with a 3+ save. For 80 points that could be worse, pretty safe against small arms. The mid-strength firepower will kill them quite quick. Perhaps the best thing about this one though is that it just has murderously strong firepower for the points cost. It gets 2 guns that aren't twin linked, so you could have 2 Bright Lances or something different if you'd like. 2 enormously powerful anti-tank shots backed up by the battle host rerolls is just about as efficient as it gets at 80 points, and having a few of these peeking out from behind terrain and trying to get line of sight on the most important enemy tanks and vehicles does seem pretty threatening. On top of that, if the enemy does get a bit too close, you might have the opportunity to do its fairly powerful mortal wound sweep attack. I guess this is perhaps representing a strafing run type attack similar to the land speed tornado for the Space Marines. If you move across a unit, then you get to roll 6d6, and for each 4+ the enemy suffers a mortal wound. That one's maybe a bit more situational, but quite a powerful move if the enemy does get a bit too close to it, particularly on top of its great firepower. Overall, these things seem a little bit undercosted at 80 points, just ferociously efficient, fast, and okay toughness for the cost, plus a cool special rule. Next up, the Warp Hunter is 130 points for a bit more of a standard Grav tank chassis. This one's armed with a D-Flail, D3 shots that hit at strength 12, AP 4, and damage 3, with blast and devastating wounds, or it can auto hit with them if it gets within 12 inches. I'd say it's kind of okay, but for 130 points it just doesn't really compete very well with the Fire Prism. Much longer range, much higher damage, and the ability to link fire I think actually outweighs this by quite a bit. The Lynx is 155 points, so just a tiny bit more expensive than the Fire Prism, and this one's actually got a bit of a tougher defensive profile, at 16 wounds with a 5+ invulnerable save, actually really quite a tough tank to kill. I say that this one's damage output is a fair bit more exciting than the Warp Hunter as well. 4 shots with the Lynx Pulsar that's assault and 48-inch range, strength 16, AP 3 and damage d6, quite a solid anti-tank profile, again very nice with battle host rerolls, and kind of interesting that it's an assault weapon as well, which ties in with its special rule Speed of Var, giving it a 23-inch move if it advances. You definitely could put on a massive turn of speed with this thing and have it just zoom all the way up to the enemy's lines. Perhaps if they did have something that they thought they could keep safe out of line of sight, and then just nose this tank to try and destroy it. Again, definitely a lot of competition with the Fire Prism, which does have a bit better damage output I think, given its own innate rerolls. I think this one is pretty notable though for just how tough it is, plus that big turn of speed that it can do when it needs to. Overall seems quite solid. Then we get on to some Titanic units. First up we've got the Cobra, a bigger toughness 11, 24 wound tank with a 5+ invulnerable save, perhaps somewhat in line with the toughness of things like Imperial Knights maybe. This one strikes with a fairly general purpose anti-tank gun with the D Impaler, D6 plus 3 attacks at strength 16, AP 4 and damage 4 with blast and devastating wounds. It also has quite a fun ability to throw out a few mortal wounds to the same unit and other units nearby, who do need to roll a 5+ to do so. Seems alright, though when competing against other very efficient sources of anti-tank, I feel like it's probably going to get overlooked between things like D-cannons, Hornets, and fire prisms and things. It's not quite as big a deal for throwing in an automatic devastating wound fate dice, at least compared with things like Wraith Knights. Still seems usable enough though, and maybe would be a bit more noticeable if other things got their points adjusted. The Scorpion's pretty similar with the same sort of chassis. This one instead gets a Scorpion Pulsar, 6 shots at strength 18, AP 3 and damage 5 with a twin linked rule, but no devastating wounds. Between the two guns do seem fairly well balanced. This one's probably just a little bit better against taking down really tough targets that have got a 5+ invulnerable save or worse. Particularly the twin linked and damage 5 should keep it very efficient. This one again has really quite a fun special rule called Lanced Obliteration. If it kills their big enemy vehicle or monster or something that has deadly demise, it happens on a 4+ rather than a 6, and that could be kind of fun for just blowing something up in the middle of the enemy army and showering a bunch of other important things with some mortal wounds. Still a bit unreliable as to whether it's actually going to go off or not, but could be a fun little incentive to try and blow up something that's got a big explosion. Next, for 440 points, is the Scathach Wraith Knight. This one's a Wraith Knight with some teleport generators, allowing it to deep strike, and at the end of the opponent's turn it gets to teleport off the board once per turn. It's mostly got a similar sort of profile to the regular Wraith Knight, that does lack the -1 damage, so it's not going to be quite as tough, trading that out for the slightly improved teleport shenanigans. Weapons wise, it's got the towering keyword, so she'll be able to get good lines of sight. And then it's got either the Inferno Lance for 4 melter shots at strength 12, AP 4 and damage D6. She'll be able to get fairly easily within 12-inch range for that as well with the teleport shenanigans, or the great big enormous version of the Warp Spider weapons in the Death Shroud cannon, either a close range dispersed anti-infantry blast, or a bit more of an anti-elite or anti-light vehicle profile with strength 10 and damage 2. I'd probably be a little bit more tempted by the Inferno Lance out of the two of them. The Death Shroud just doesn't really seem enormously general purpose, not really being able to threaten heavy stuff all that well, and it seems like there's better options for mass anti-infantry damage. Does seem quite disruptive to have it jumping on and off around the board with the Webway shunt, but I feel like in general regular Wraith Knights are still going to outcompete this with the massive great big Wraith Cannon combo, even if they do cost a few more points now. Finally we come to the really big titanic things of the Aeldari army. The Revenant Titan is the first one, as the smaller of the two for 1100 points, kind of an equivalent for the Imperial Warhound Titan maybe. This one's going to take up over half an army at 2000 points, but does have some pretty crazy stats. It's massively fast with a 16-inch move. It's got toughness 13, 30 wounds and a 2+ save with a 4+ invulnerable against range, and a casual objective control 16, so you're probably controlling whatever it stands on. Its weapons are massively impressive profiles, but still for 1100 points, I'm not sure they quite get it there in terms of being good damage per point. The Pulsars get 6 shots at strength 14 and damage 4, or you can have Sonic Lances for D6 plus 6 shots at strength 8 and damage 2. They auto hit, I suppose, so could be kind of powerful for Overwatch, but you would have to pay double the command points for using it on this guy. Overall, I'm sure it'd be a very intimidating model to face, but probably just going a bit too many eggs in one basket. I suspect that you'd probably be better off with the equivalent points in Wraith Knights and other supporting units maybe. Otherwise, we've got the enormous Phantom Titan, 2100 points, so out of scope for most normal sized games of Warhammer 40k, unless you're playing some great big apocalypse type game, where I'm sure it will be towering over most of the rest of the army. Always quite fun to see models that have basically the same points cost as an entire army all in one go, and this guy gets toughness 14, a huge 55 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save, and if it explodes then it deals d6 plus 6 wounds to the Aeldari around it. As you'd expect, its stats are fairly ridiculous. The Wraith Glaive that it can field has 6 attacks at strength 18 and damage 12 if you get it in combat. Its Pulsars get 8 shots at a flat damage of 6, or you can take D-Bombards with D6 attacks and 2d6 damage. Should likely kill 2 big threats in the enemy army each turn, but still generally just going to be a big model for fun and fluffy games. Finally, for the Aeldari Forge World units, we have the Nightwing Flyer. This one's 150 points and gets armed with a twin Bright Lance and a twin Shuriken cannon. I must admit this one's probably the weakest out of the flyers. I'd rate it below the Hemlock Wraith Fighter. It just doesn't really have the damage output to compete with the other two. Certainly a Crimson Hunter is going to outshoot it against the vast majority of targets. Much better to have 2 Bright Lances than a single twin linked one. I guess its only real big advantage is having a hover mode so it can start on the board, but even so, it just won't compare very well to other things that you can start on the board like fire prisms. In general though, I feel like the Aeldari really haven't done too badly out of their Forge World choices. Lots of pretty usable units here. I feel like perhaps the most interesting ones are maybe the Hornets and the Shadow Spectres. Hornets are just seriously nasty mainline firepower to buzz around the enemy army and take big chunks out of them. The Shadow Spectres have got nice general purpose damage output and move shoot move. And I feel like one of the other nice ones is the Lynx as well. Really quite a tough grav tank for just 155 points and can throw out some anti-tank shots after moving very fast. So now we've covered the Forge World units, that just about brings us to the end of this review of Index Aeldari. Certainly an army that's done very well in 10th edition so far, and I'm sure they'll be continuing to do so for the near future at least. I think just about everyone was predicting that they'd do kind of well just based on their Index previewed rules. Both the Fate dice and their full rerolls are pretty powerful mechanics, and then they backed that up with some very usable enhancements and massively powerful stratagems, particularly Phantasm. Then they've got a bunch of pretty efficient and interesting units. To lead the army, I feel like the Farseers for the Fate dice plus the Autarchs for command points are a very good pairing that doesn't really cost all that much, never mind the other things that they can do. And then back that up with a whole bunch of heavy-hitting anti-tank weapons to beat down most other armour lists, things like Fire Prisms, Hornets, War Walkers, Wraith Knights, or maybe D-Cannons. With the rerolls, I think there's a pretty good chance that you outshoot a whole bunch of other armies in the game, and then have a fair few units going round to hoover up secondary objective points and scrap with enemy infantry. Things like Wind Riders and Shroud Runners seem quite nice for that, as do Warp Spiders with their crazy 24-inch move and still strike. Some Rangers seem quite nice for the midfield as well, potentially with Illic Night Spear as well to make them untargetable at long range. Overall a very scary army. I think I probably would brace myself if I was collecting them for a few more points nerfs in the Autumn Balance update. I perhaps still wouldn't be too surprised if they might do something about devastating wounds with the Fate Dice interaction at some point. I'm not sure if that's safe from further nerfs yet. Let me know your thoughts on the Index though, and what's been working out well for you in the Aeldari army. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. If you have been finding the videos useful, or you'd just like to help support, channel patrons do get a few advantages: seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.